The charity gala was in full swing, the soft hum of a jazz band filling the air as Hollywood elites mingled over champagne. Clint Eastwood, now in his 90s but still carrying that unmistakable aura of rugged wisdom, stood near a quiet corner, watching the crowd with an amused smirk. Then she appeared. A woman in her late 40s, dressed in a simple yet elegant black dress, walked toward him. Her hands trembled as she reached into her clutch, pulling out a small, faded movie ticket, creased, yellowed with time. She held it out to him, her voice steady, but thick with emotion. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, "I've waited a lifetime to give you this." Clint took the ticket carefully, his sharp blue eyes scanning the print. It was an old stub for Dirty Harry, dated decades ago. A strange weight settled in his chest. He looked back at the woman, silently urging her to continue. "That ticket belonged to my father," she explained. "He bought it the day your movie came out, excited to see his favorite actor on the big screen. He was a police officer, you see, and he always said your movies reminded him why he wore the badge. But he never made it to the theater that night." A solemn pause. The room around them faded into irrelevance. That was the night he was killed in the line of duty. He was chasing down a suspect, but never came home. My mother kept this ticket all her life. She said it was the last thing my father ever held before duty called. Clint exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had heard countless stories over the years, but something about this one felt different, unfinished. "I was just a little girl when it happened," she continued, a sad smile forming. "But I grew up hearing his stories, how much he admired you. To him, you weren't just an actor. You were a symbol of justice, of standing your ground even when the world was against you. So, when I was old enough, I followed in his footsteps. I became a detective, and I carried this ticket with me every single day, like a promise to finish what he started." Clint nodded, absorbing her words with deep respect. "That takes a lot of guts," he finally said, his voice as steady as ever. "Your father would be proud." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the clutch she held. "Mr. Eastwood, here's where it gets strange. Just last year, I closed the biggest case of my career, a cold case that had haunted our department for decades." Something in her tone sent a shiver down Clint's spine. "The case was about a man, a suspect my father was chasing the night he died. No one ever caught him. He vanished like a ghost. But last year I found him. He had been living under a different name, hiding in plain sight. And when we finally got his confession, do you know what he said?" Clint remained silent, waiting. "He said he never forgot that night. He said my father had him cornered in an alley. He was seconds away from giving up until he saw something, a Dirty Harry poster on the theater wall, and he panicked because he thought my father was you." Clint's eyes widened slightly. He was terrified, said he thought my father had that same fearless look as your characters, that unshakable presence. So he ran. And in that moment of fear, he made a mistake. He shot my father and disappeared into the night. A deep, heavy silence stretched between them. "All these years," she whispered, "I thought this ticket was just a reminder of the night my father died. But it turns out it was something more. Your movies didn't just inspire him, they scared the man who took his life. And in a way, they led me back to the truth." Clint let out a slow breath, rubbing his thumb over the faded ink on the ticket. "Life's funny that way," he said quietly. "The past always finds a way to catch up." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Eastwood, not just for your movies, but for unknowingly being a part of my father's story. And mine." Clint didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, his own ticket stub from Dirty Harry, kept as a keepsake from the premiere night. He placed it in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "Then let's call it even," he said, giving her a rare, knowing smile. She let out a quiet, tearful laugh. And in that moment, the past and present finally aligned. Two lives forever connected by a ticket that was never used, but had somehow changed everything.